very much for inviting me to talk today. Can everyone see that all right? I've got a banner across it. There we go. So today I'm just going to do a very quick whiz through some exciting aliens that we found in Somerset in the last few years. There we go. So Somerset has a long history of interest in aliens, as do other counties. White's flora of Bristol included many aliens. Mrs. Sandwith, the first Vice-County Recorder for VC6. I'm recorder for VC6. Stephen and Simon are recorders for VC5. And between us, we share Somerset. Mrs. Sandwith wrote the Adventive Flora of the Port of Bristol, which included many plants I've never even heard of, things that came into the port and with goods in those days. S.T. Dunn wrote an Alien Flora of Britain and a very interesting little paper on aliens from Turkish barley in a quarry near Bath. Adrian Grenfell, of course, wrote Aliens and Adventives column in the SBI News for several years, about the time that I joined the SBI. Clive Lovett was very interested in aliens, and Rob Randall in Bath and Simon Leach in Taunton are fellow enthusiasts, and many others as well. And we have a large number of species recorded in Somerset. There are about 3,000 taxa recorded in Somerset. That's probably including all hybrids and subspecies, of which about 1,200 are natives and approximately 1,800 are aliens. That's on my screen. That's disappeared under our panel. Sorry. So there are some iconic alien species in Somerset, and perhaps the Steepholm peony is the most well-known of these, Peonia mascula. It was first recorded on Steepholm in 1803, but had been probably there for many years before that. It was included in the first and the second editions of the Red Data books as a possible native, but it's now very much considered to be a neophyte. Probably introduced to Steepholm originally by the monks. It was a medicinal plant, and it's since been found at Banwell Caves in 1979. It was recorded there and has been recorded several times since, naturalised in woodlands outside the garden. And in 2015, Fred Rumsey and I found it beside the A303. This photograph on the left is a plant by the fast-moving A303, and the plants are still there. How they got there is a complete mystery. And then another iconic alien of Somerset is Leucojum vernum, the spring snowflake, the Stagumber snowflake, as we do call it in Somerset. This was first recorded in Somerset in 1910, so not very long ago, and yet again for the first and second editions of the Red Data book, it was considered possibly native in Somerset and Dorset. You can see that it's actually very widespread now. This is the map from Live Distribution Database, DDB data, and here it is in flower. It's in flower at the moment. It grows at Stagumber in several sites. Stagumber is on Quantox in BC5. They're all beside streams, and can you imagine that it used to grow in a garden and it just washed downstream a little out of the garden, landed, spread, fell in the stream again and washed a bit further down, a bit like snowdrops do. And then, of course, there's Somerset Skullcap, iconic Somerset plant, very pretty Scutellaria altissima. This is a relic garden plant growing in the Wadbury Valley in Mells. It's been recorded there since 1929. It grows up the sides of a lovely wooded valley, but this valley was the former site of the Fussell's Iron Works, with lots of industrial buildings, but also a few cottages. So it was probably grown in a cottage garden, and it's escaped up the banks of the valley. We've since found it in a few sites in Somerset, a couple of places in Bath, and it's been found in VC5, and you can see from the map that it's been found in other places, not just in Somerset. So now I'm just going to show you a few interesting aliens that we found in the last few years that other people might begin to find, so worth looking out for. This is Sedum prialtum, Greater Mexican stone crop, native to Mexico, which we found last year on a walk led by Clive Lovett and I at Portbury Wharf. Members of Bristol Nats found these plants sort of tucked between the big boulders of the sea defences. But we walked past some gardens and there it was in seaside gardens. It's the sort of plant you'd add to a seaside garden. And you can see from the distribution map, hopefully, that most of the sites are indeed coastal. It's been known from Jersey since 1920, naturalised on cliffs. And then it was found on the Isle of Wight in 2003, and then subsequently on mainland Britain, and then on the south coast of Ireland, where it's probably a little bit happier than it is in Somerset. It's not likely to persist unless it's in a very sheltered spot because it is frost tender. And last year, Rob Randall found Cochlearia acorlis, violet cress, on the paving of the circus in Bath. I don't know how he saw this, although it did have flowers when he saw it. This is his photograph, very pretty little plant. It's about the same size as Mind Your Own Business, but with little mauve flowers. Little tiny creeping plants in between the cracks of paving slabs, and it was new to Somerset. Now, this map, if you can see it, is the handbooks map option from the DDB. If I'd used the live map, you wouldn't be able to see most of the spots because they were so faded. There are some old records and not very many new records. Indeed, Rob's record was the first for Britain since 2006. Now, apparently this has been in cultivation since 1824. Personally, I'm not quite sure why you'd want to grow it, but it's a bit like Pratia, I suppose, a little tiny creeping thing for a rock garden. And then it escapes, and it's been found as a nursery weed and on paving. It was first recorded in the wild in 1908, but very, very rarely recorded. Also in Bath, if you visit Bath, go to the circus for Cochlearia acorlis and then move on to the Royal Crescent for Galium murale. Fred found it there in 2010, a tiny patch, and now actually you can see this as you walk along the paving because it's forming little green patches all between the cobbles of the paving of the Royal Crescent. It's a very interesting alien because it was recorded in Musselburgh in Scotland in 1911. And it was then considered to be a wool alien. And you can see why from the photograph and my little tiny sketch. The capsule, the fruits have little hooked bristles, which would catch in wool. But then it wasn't recorded again until 2007, when Matt Stribley found it in Cornwall, down at Lostwithiel. And then Fred found it in Bath in 2010. So this wasn't in the last atlas, but will be in the next one, perhaps. We'll find out very, very soon. And it's been found in a few other sites you can see from the map since then. And last year, Fred and I found it in Castle Carey, which is in the south of BC6, again on paving. So most of all the recent records are on paving, on quaysides, car parks. It's quite interesting that it was found at Fishguard ferry port by Paul Green. Before it was then found at Rosslare a few years later, again by Paul. So you can imagine it hitched a lift with somebody across the water. And it would be quite easy to disperse because of these little hooked bristles on the seeds. In the same year that Fred found that, Pam Millman, another BSBI member, found Urtica membranacea in Nailsea. Now, this had just appeared a few years before in BSBI News, reported as new to Britain. It was found in Warwick and in Cinderford in the Forest of Dean in 2006. So it's two places in 2006, and then in Somerset in 2010. And it was postulated in the article in BSBI News that perhaps it came in as a a contaminant of a weed of large plants from the Mediterranean in big pots, perhaps big olives being imported. And we kind of thought we were going to find this increasingly. And there are quite a few scattered spots, as you can see from the map, but we haven't found it again in Somerset since then. It's still there in Nailsea. Pam recorded it again last year, and I've seen it a few times in between. But we haven't found it anywhere else, and there's only 2 more records in the southwest. So one to look out for, but quite an interesting, mysterious vector for this one. Last year, Simon Leach in VC5 found this amazing Syrian thistle, Notobasis syriaca, which none of us had ever seen before. He found it at Pitminster, which is near Taunton, new to VC5. We thought it was new to Somerset, but as it turns out, the last record for Britain was probably a record on waste ground in Bristol by Cecil Sandwith and her son Noel Sandwith, first and second vice-county recorders for VC6. And in that year, it was also reported from Burton-on-Trent, where it was found by J.P.M. Brennan and J. Chappell. And we've also found a 1905 specimen on Herbaria at Home from Leith Docks, found by James Fraser. So 3 former records, all a long time ago, none since 1937, but definitely one to keep an eye open for. Probably came in as a contaminant of grain. Of course, we're seeing more and more birdseed aliens, plants which are included in the seed mixes of birdseed, or come in with the seed mix actually, because Niger on the right there is the host of yellow dodder, Scutellaria. Oh my goodness, I've forgotten this, campestris, which sometimes comes up in people's gardens because they've fed birds with Niger seed and unwittingly introduced the dodder seeds as well. Sunflowers, of course, are often found, and Niger is being found in flower more and more. But these 2 grasses are ones we don't see so often, but probably should be looking out for more. Sorghum bicolour was found by Rupert Higgins. This is his photograph beside Cheddar Reservoir, in a place where people feed birds. And it's turned up in 5 different places in VC5 since Rupert found it in VC6. And then Echinochlora esculenta, this middle one, Fred and I found this plant in a road in Marksbury, and that's had another record in VC6 as well since 2000. But when this turned up on the bank of Chew Valley Lake, found by Margaret Webster, we didn't know what this was. Margaret and I did a lot of research. She kept going back and looking at it, and we took lots of photographs, and we really hoped we were going to see a flower. And we never did, because the poor plant got the frost before it flowered. But we did identify it, and it's Salvia hispanica, Chia. Chia, of course, is, as my daughter told me immediately, is a health food, sold as little seeds, which you sprinkle on your muesli. But it's also included in birdseed mixes, and that's probably how it came to grow at the edge of Chew Valley Lake. It's turned up there a couple of times since, and I've found it in the street in Frome. Margaret's found it in the street in Winford, and as you can see from this map, other people have found it too. When we found it, it was reported as new to Britain in BSBI News, but actually there were 4 earlier records, as it turns out, in Cambridgeshire. It was first found in 2013 in Ely. So this is another plant which wasn't in the last atlas, and definitely one to look out for. And I hope one day somebody will see it in flower. That it actually was in the last BSBI News, and again, a picture very like these, just a bud, then it gets the frost and goes black. But when it does flower, it has very pretty blue flowers. Another plant of cultivation, which Fred found last year, was Calabash, Lagenaria Scutellaria. He found a splendid great plant climbing up a dead elm tree at the edge of a car park of Curry House in VC5. And he went back and saw it several times. It had these beautiful flowers. It would have had fruits like this, bottle gourds. It was new to Somerset, and we think it was the 3rd record for Britain. one to look out for. Maybe people are growing these a little more often than they used to. I've certainly seen them in gardens, but this was the first time it'd been seen in Somerset outside garden. We also last year found Datura ferox, the long-spined thorn-apple, new to Somerset. This was very exciting. Fred spotted it from the car I was driving. We parked up and went back expecting to see an ordinary thorn-apple, and it had these amazing wicked long spines. So it was very clearly not the common thorn-apple. If it had not had the fruits though, I think we would have recorded it as Datura stramonium, because they're almost identical vegetatively. So this was new to Somerset. It's got a few records on the DDB, but definitely one to look out for. Another plant that has a look-alike is Scutellaria. So I became aware of the existence of duck potatoes only a few years ago, when Richard Lansdown asked Fred and I to go and look at, well, go and collect some seeds, hopefully, from a population in Godalming in Surrey. We found the population. It's very large, but it was about 6 foot down in the river, and there was no way we could get to it. So we didn't collect seeds for Richard. But then I saw it very soon after that in Margaret's garden, Margaret Webster's garden. A beautiful pot, this one on the left, pot full of it, that she's grown for many years. And then shortly after that, I did a survey at a local golf course, and there it was again, growing on the edge of the lake. So clearly introduced. It's a fairly newly made lake with lots of native planting around the edge, including duck potato, masquerading as Scutellaria sagittifolia. And then alarm bells started ringing, because a few years before, in 2020, Fred and I recorded Scutellaria sagittifolia, the native one, in a valley near Selwood, which is right over on the eastern edge of BC6. And it was far from any river, far from any house there as well. Just seemed a very strange place for Scutellaria sagittifolia, and it was a new 10-kilometre square record. So we went back to look at that, and lo and behold, it was duck potato after all. So on the left, sorry, on the right, but it's underneath my images of people, there is a picture of the more common shape, but actually our arrowhead is very, very variable in leaf shape. So I think we can be forgiven perhaps for the initial mistake, but definitely another one for people to look out for. And finally, well, who knew that there was more than one species of wolfia in this country? But of course we all did when we read Richard's article in British and Irish Botany in 2022. Richard found Wolfia columbiana in Somerset, new to Somerset. He also found Wolfia columbiana and Wolfia globosa elsewhere, and wrote a paper in British and Irish Botany alerting us to look out for this different Wolfia. Now, anyone who knows Wolfia knows it's actually very small. This photograph on the right shows many little Wolfia plants and some larger Spirodela and Lemna gibber. You can see the Lemna gibber is slightly fat. This is fat duckweed. It's been attacked here, and you can see it's a thick little thallus. This is the Spirodela, and these are all Wolfias. Lovely bright green, like little tiny peas floating on the water. So Wolfia columbiana, by contrast, this is photographed down the microscope, is a yellowy green. It's not the same distinctive pea green, it's yellowy green. And some of the fronds float just below the surface, not on the surface. And so some of them have a sort of a ring effect, where a bit like a poached egg, this one, where the centre is above the surface and then the outside is all below the surface of the water. And so you see this concentric rings. So that's the distinctive feature, and the colour. Size-wise, they're about the same. The other distinctive feature is the difference in the number of stomata, but I found that rather difficult to count. So this is something else that we should all be looking out for. So there's always something new to find. Some things are hiding there, waiting for us to realise that they're there and have been for some time. So I just urge everyone to go out and enjoy aliens. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you to all those whose photos and records I've used, and a big thank you to Tom Humphrey for the amazing DDB. Thank you.
It's really enlightening, and I'm sure we'll go out and look with new eyes at some of the things that are around us. And I'm really quite jealous of some of the exciting things that you found in Somerset. But I guess you're jealous of the things that Alan Leslie finds in Cambridgeshire. So it's share and share alike. Has anybody got any questions for Helena? I think you can either put those in the Q&A or raise a hand. Put questions in it. I think I'll ask one just to as a starter. You'd got some of these casuals that haven't been seen for more than 50 years, and they suddenly appear. Is it possible that they came out of a seed bank, or do you really think it's contaminants in modern seeds that have caused them to reappear?
So Galium murale, for example, it appeared in completely different places to the original long ago record. So I think it's a re-invasion by a different route. Originally, as I say, a wool alien. We don't have those wool tips anymore to go and explore. So people don't find the wool aliens, although shoddy is still spread on fields sometimes. So people do find wool shoddy aliens. I don't know of any fields that have shoddy. So the routes that aliens have taken to get to the country change all the time, and that's part of the excitement of them, I think. So probably they're coming now. It's coming attached to people rather than sheep, I would imagine.
Yeah, so people are the new sheep. Yes.
And it's I mean, alien hunting has changed. I used to read Adrian Grenfell's column with avid delight, reading about all their trips to Brislington Tip and Bedminster Tip that he and Clive Lovett and Tony Titchin used to make, and people all across the country. But we don't have access to many of those tips anymore. So we look in different places for aliens, and aliens come through different routes. I did write an article for BSBI News once about various routes to Glastonbury that various different individuals take.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Cambridgeshire aliens were found by Graham Easy hunting through tips. And yeah, sadly, they're all fenced off these days.
Yes.
So there's a couple of questions in the chat. So is the Peony still on Steep Home?
Well, yes. So that beautiful photograph was taken by Steve Parker last year. Tragically, I didn't go to Steep Home last year. I was booked, and the day that I was supposed to go with Fred as well, the sea was too rough and it was cancelled. But hopefully, I'll go next year. But it's dwindled dramatically. There's a photograph on the front, I think, of the booklet about the flora of Steep Home, which shows a beautiful colony of lots and lots of flowers. It's been in captivity in wire cages for several years, and well, I did see it. I went in August. My only trip to Steep Home was in August, which is too late really, and the poor plant was looking very sorry for itself in a cage, all wilted. So I think it is dwindling. Yes.
And an anonymous attendee asks, how many of the plants you mentioned are likely to survive a harsh winter?
Oh well, the ones that won't would be the Datura ferox, probably wouldn't, the calabash, but Galium murale, I've had that on my front path, and Galium parisiense as well, for years now. When we found it in Bath, I brought a seed home to look at, and then I dropped the seed out on the front path, and it's been there forming a patch ever since. The Urtica membranacea has been in Nailsea for for years in the same place and yet not really spreading. I don't know about the notobasis, the wonderful thistle. That looks quite tough. So many of them would survive, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. My impression locally in Cambridge is that the Polycarbon tetraphyllum has gone down a bit over this past winter,
right.
but there are still little seedlings around, so I'm sure it will resurface quite well.
Yeah, see, that's a really interesting one because it's a native plant, but now it's behaving a bit like the Galium murale, is behaving more like an alien, as is Galium parisiense, which wall bedstraw, which was a very rare plant on walls, but now it's spreading on pavements and turning up all over the place. And some other native plants are doing the same thing.
I shall actually mention something similar to that in my talk. So I'll leave it at saying thank you very much, Helena, for keeping us entertained as always, and a round of applause.
Thank you.